day, everybody, and welcome to this Transcending Together hot take. Right, hi, folks. Haven't seen you all for a while. Been doing a bit of this and that, but I thought something's been on my mind, and I guess with the reintroduction of the economic narrative into our general political sphere. Um, I would like to. I thought I would cover a few things that I've written about on my Substack, tigergirl.substack.com. Um, but obviously, I guess for a lot of people, it's TLDR. So I thought maybe doing it in a video format would be helpful. So this is a paper. This is based on a paper I wrote around the reform slash Tory slash right wing dog whistle around stopping the boats, and the paper really went into which of the boats that we need to worry about. Now, obviously, a lot of people have cottoned on to the fact that it's probably the yachts and not the dinghies that are the problem. But what this presentation goes into is exactly why that it's not the dinghies that are the problem. And I've tried to sort of break it down into the very core basics of pure economics. Now, I am an unapologetic anarcho-socialist, but I did study economics, and off the back of that, I do believe this argument that I'm going to present in this presentation really talks directly to that, to the core fundamentals of economics, the kind of stuff you would learn in Economics 101. Um, so it's in sort of three parts. So the first part I'll take you through, just for those that don't know, what are the basic fundamentals of what's known as the economic flow model, and then I'll get into what happens with offshoring and when companies outsource um, their uh, their their various services and supply chains offshore. And then I'll look at what happens on with the economic impact around refugees, specifically not immigration, because obviously immigration, to distinguish between the two, when I say immigration, I'm looking at it from the perspective of controlled, managed migration, which my own family, myself, we've been through this process to come into the UK. So that's a separate issue. I want to talk more about the refugees, because they tend to fit more neatly into that box of the people on the dinghies, the small boats that we hear so much about. So I want to talk about the impact of that, and perhaps a better way of thinking about things from an economic standpoint. And then I also want to look at AI and the impact that AI is going to have. Now, I framed all of this from the basis around a services economy. Um, and for those that don't know, according to the Office of National Statistics, 2024, 4/5, or let's say 80% of the UK economy, the UK GDP, comes from services. So I've looked at it from that perspective, although I do use goods and services interchangeably in the discussion. But I'm looking at this more from my personal experience and from the standpoint of how outsourcing of various services are in my personal experience of how I feel that is impacting. So, um, yeah, let's get into this. There are a couple of other presentations that I want to put together, which will follow from this one. One is talking about it's another paper that I've written, but it's talking about credit, um, and why that's such a problem, and personal credit, personal debt, I'm talking about. Um, and then there's another one that I've yet to write, but I've sort of got the thinking around, so I think I'm just going to put that straight into a presentation around what I like to think of as progressive taxation rates. So it's looking at taxing, how to bring about a taxation system framed around the utility of the thing that's being purchased. So it doesn't talk too much about income tax. It's more around transactional based taxation. But that's for another thing. I might allude to it. That or the other one, or the one about credit during this presentation. But those will follow afterwards. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Let me just switch over my screens. Right, are we ready? Right, so step one. The economic flow model basically has these components to it. So in the middle, you've got the government. We've got the households, which is people like you and me, just Joe Public citizen. We've got businesses, and we've got the banks. And these four entities, obviously there's more than this, but I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible to demonstrate how these flows work. So, right, we got that. Those are our first four primary entities. So the first step in this process is that the households will sell their services to their labor to the businesses, and the businesses in return for that will pay money to the households. The households will then use that money to procure and buy goods and services from various businesses, and so those goods and services flow back to the households, and the households send money to the businesses for those goods and services. The businesses also pay dividends to the household based on their profits, and the businesses also trade with each other. In the final step, we show how the businesses and the households pay taxes to the government, and in return for the taxes received, the government provides services to the households and to the businesses. As I said, it's very highly simplified, but this, at its core, are the sort of initial building blocks of how the economics flow model works. So basically, to recap, we've got the households provide their labor to businesses. The businesses pay salaries, money to the households for use of that, and the households then use that money to purchase goods and services. And businesses also send money into households via dividends, and the businesses obviously trade with each other. And then at the end of the process, or during the process, the government takes its share, it takes its taxes, and that's where I intimate I got a discussion I want to have with you around that at some future point. But essentially, and then in return, the government provides services to businesses and to households, which that in its sort of simplistic term is the initial building blocks of the economic flow model. There is one final thing to add before we close out this initial section, and that is that the government can also, and does, obviously, procure labor from households, because people work for the government, and in return for that, the government pays money to the households, and the government takes taxes. So it's kind of a circuitous system there, closed loop system. Goes to my conversation around taxes later, or in next video, in a future video. And likewise, the government purchases goods and services from businesses, which it provides money to the businesses for those, and then takes taxes from the business for the money it's given them. Again, kind of a closed loop system. um, and then at the end of all of this, if we were to take a snapshot moment in time, the business's profits go up into the banks. The surplus that the government has after it's paid for all of its services, and it's paid all of its labor, that is technically a surplus, goes to the banks, and any money which the households have left over, if you can believe it, that will also land simplistically in the banks as savings. Right, so now that we've got the basics under our belts, let's take a look at what happens when we start trading with a foreign country. So we use terms like onshore, which is stuff that happens in the UK, and offshore, which is stuff that happens in a foreign country. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to include the households, the government, and the businesses of said foreign country, which shall remain nameless at this point. Right, so now what happens when the local business decides it's going to, instead of trading with another local business, it's going to procure a good or service from overseas? And this could be something, especially in the UK's case, with services, call centers, IT, payroll processing. A lot of these things are sent offshore. So this is typically something a business will do in order to save money, because of what I call the human resource arbitrage. It's cheaper to procure labor offshore, and companies here do that by procuring these services from foreign companies. To name a few, companies like Infosys, Fujitsu, famous for the post office scandal, Capita, TCS. These are just some of the ones that I've come across in my day-to-day dealings, working in the career that I do. Right, so the company disconnects from a local vendor or supplier and connects with a foreign one. The foreign company then, in order to supply the goods and services that the onshore company has asked them to supply, will obviously recruit people. So they'll buy labor locally, and they'll pay salaries locally. And this has the effect of reducing then the amount of labor that the onshore company is buying in the local market, and will affect the amount of salaries being paid in the local market. So that's your trade-off. You're basically moving that labor and that money outside of the UK's economic flow. The foreign government then gets to benefit from the taxes that can be drawn from the companies, from the households, which is taxes which are then lost to the UK economic flow. And the local households, the UK households, now probably have to reduce the amount that they spend locally buying goods and services. Their savings will be impacted, and those, however, conversely, in the offshore country, the procurement of goods and services by households goes up. So what we're seeing here is the economic flow being diverted out of the UK and into a foreign economy, where the households receive a reduction in the amount of income that they're receiving, and the government receives gets a reduction in the amount of taxes that they are collecting from people in the UK, and less savings will flow into the banks because people have less money now because these jobs have gone. And then, just from a point of simplicity, I haven't reduced the amount of taxes that the UK based company is paying, because presumably their profits will go up, so their taxes will go up. Of course, we know that it's not a straight line thing, but again, that's a conversation for a more detailed discussion around tax avoidance. But essentially, if we want to keep it simple, the company keeps paying tax in the UK, and they will then deposit more money in their bank, and they will pay more dividends to the few fortunate households that happen to own shares in said company. So what happens next is then, clearly because the government is receiving less income via taxes, they then decide, well, what's good for business is good for government, because we keep hearing governments talking about, we've got if we were running a business, how would we do it? So they join the offshore party, and they start procuring goods and services from offshore companies, and that obviously diverts income away from local businesses. This then takes away taxes that those businesses were paying, adding to the taxes that they were losing from the local people that were being employed locally. It also reduces the goods and services that they're buying from the businesses. It reduces the amount of labor that they're buying in the local market, because that labor is being provided offshore. That then will reduce the amount of profit that the local companies are making. It'll reduce the dividends that are flowing back to the households, which will reduce the savings of those households. And ultimately, the inevitable conclusion of all of this is households, if there are things that we need to buy, so we go into debt. And when I talk about debt and credit in my next presentation, I'll go into some of this. But effectively, the households go into debt. The government goes into deficit. It has to borrow. And essentially, it's just a race to the bottom. And this is, for me, the end run of what happens when you start offshoring in an economy like ours, which is 80% services. There is no other way of looking at this other than ultimately economic disaster for the country, for undertaking initiatives like this. I think equally as well, it causes a brain drain, because all of those people that would have been working in the UK economy now don't have jobs. So I started my career in IT. I was on a help desk. That's how I learned the tools of my trade. If those jobs just don't exist for people in the UK, they are effectively they're being made overseas. And if you think about it, we're in a situation in the UK where we can't even produce cars that run on our roads. They're all imported, and yet a country like India can land a vehicle on the moon. And a lot of the people on the right will lament this and say, oh, you see, it's all the aid that we've been giving them. And it's not that. It's that we have transferred our intellectual capital to foreign countries. We have taught them. They have learned working for our businesses. And this concludes really this aspect of it, where we really look at the boats, which boats are the problem. And it's not the people arriving on dinghies. There was an article a few months ago where ASDA were outsourcing their IT department, and 130 people were going to lose their jobs to offshoring. And so, 13 people arriving in a boat is significantly smaller than 130 jobs being lost. And all of it is around the relentless pursuit on the business side of profit. And sadly for the government, they're desperately trying to reduce their deficit. So any way they can reduce their cost would be a good thing. Except for the fact that they're doing it, they're sacrificing the future intellectual capital of this country. And this, more than anything, is for me the cornerstone of what is failing in the sort of late stage capitalist, globalization of economies. And I honestly believe that you could solve, you could close the borders and do like reform want people to do, and turn the boats away from at Dover or whatever. It's orders of magnitude minute compared to the impact of what's happening, the economic degradation that's taking place with this rapacious outsourcing that's happening in our country. And these jobs need to be onshored. We need to be building capacity, training people. We need to have our own IT companies. We need to have our own IT outsourcing companies. And this business of offshoring stuff needs to stop. So that here endeth the lesson on that. Next, I'm going to get into the discussion around. We're just going to contrast what happens with refugees, and then a little bit on AI, and then I think I'll wrap it up. I have to see how long this runs for. It was initially supposed to be quite a short presentation, but maybe it's going to be a bit bigger than I thought. But we'll wrap this one up, and then let's have a look at what happens when refugees come into the country. Okay, so first up, along comes our boat full of people, and those people are subsumed into, from an economics perspective, the households, and the government pays a certain amount of money to house and provide allowances and so forth for the people who have come in. So taken in isolation, that can be perceived as a drain. However, 100% of that money that goes to those people that are coming in gets spent on goods and services, as the people, they're paying rent, or the rent is being paid to businesses on their behalf. And so 100% of that actually flows directly into local businesses. So if anything, it's actually a payment. The cost of the refugees is a cost the government is incurring, sending it directly into the pockets and the profits of the businesses. So simplistically speaking, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's money that stayed in the economy, as distinct from what happens with outsourcing. And the local economies benefit from that. And equally, The provision of goods and services increases labor requirements, increases the amount of salaries that are paid. So it's not really a drain on the UK economy because the money's staying in the economy, unlike with outsourcing. More importantly, is this question around whether people who are applying for refugee status, now under the current law, they're not allowed to work. If they were allowed to work, that would remove the burden on the state to pay to support these people. They would provide their labor to businesses, and those businesses would pay them money, and those businesses, that money would be taxed, and you have a net sum gain into the treasury, into the government. So the question then really hinges on what jobs are these people doing, and the reality is just because they're a refugee doesn't mean they're unskilled. It doesn't mean they can't fulfill a job in one of our core public services, one of any service in this country. They could be doctors, they could be nurses. So they're not necessarily unskilled, incapable people. Refugees are forced into fleeing their countries for a variety of different reasons, and it's so redundant to assume that they are unskilled and unworthy and incapable of contributing to society. So I think that in and of itself, I think firstly there is no drain on the economy. The money stays in the economy. If anything, it's money flowing from the government to businesses, and more than that, it's, I think, a societal imperative that these people are allowed to work. And maybe they will just work as in the gig economy, but maybe they won't. Maybe they actually do have significant skills that can contribute a net benefit to our society. So again, orders of magnitude smaller than the problem created by offshoring. And quite frankly, it's a non-issue, and it's only being made an issue by certain people in our government and in our media. And I'm with Zach Polanski and the Green Party on this. Immigrants are a benefit. Refugees can be a benefit. And, let's not forget that a significant number of them have come to this country as a consequence of the actions of our government and our businesses in foreign countries, in foreign interventions. So I think let's just stop with that nonsense, and let's start looking at how we can actually benefit from having these people coming into our country. Beyond the benefits around diversity and all the soft side, there's a hard reality to this, and that is that these people have had educations, and there's no reason that they can't be contributing to our society. It's a political choice, and our governments are choosing to not let them work, and as a consequence, yes, then they are perceived as a drain on the economy, but ultimately they're not, because that money, 100% of it's spent in the economy. None of it's frittered away to the Cayman Islands. So I think let's just not go there. I think we need to look at how we actually structure our public services, our economy, to actually benefit from this fantastic influx of skilled, unskilled people into our country, because we can benefit from that. I think what's more dangerous is what's going to happen with AI, and that for me is it's very simple when you look at it in economic terms. And if we move on now into the AI side of it, and you can see where, so if a business outsources serve certain things to AI, and again I come back to I come back to this point. We are an 80% service economy. Services are going to be inordinately impacted by AI, and every company that switches to AI reduces the amount of labor that they're pulling out into their businesses, reduces the payments that are going to those households, reduces the households' abilities to consume, to buy. It'll increase exponentially the demand for services on the government to support people who have lost their jobs to AI. Um, I just think this hell for leather dive into AI and all the promises it makes, it's all just it it's going to be devastating taken to its natural conclusion. It will completely and utterly destroy the fundamentals of the economic model that this country is built on, that capitalism is built on. And I saw somebody made an analogy to this a while ago where they said, if you look at Star Trek is socialism. It's underpinned by socialism. And maybe that's where we're going. Maybe the next phase of economics is a more socialist type approach. But quite honestly, and really in closing, in terms of this aspect of the economic model, AI is going to disrupt in a way I don't think any of us are ready for. And I think, really just to sum up this episode, if we look back, we've had a look. I've tried to keep this as rooted in the core fundamentals of economic theory. The economic flow model is the cornerstone. It's the first thing you learn when you study economics, and it's how Western societies work. It's how most societies work, actually, one way or another. You have a bit more business, a bit more government, a bit more households, but ultimately, this is how it works. And hopefully, what you can take away from this is that it's a demonstration of the very basic truths around where we are. And I would hope, and I've got a lot of hope, I am a Green Party member, so put my hand on my heart. I've got a green screen behind me, which you can't see, but it's there. And I just love the message that's coming from Zach Polanski and the various leaders in the Green Party. And I love the emphasis that's being placed on, let's look at the households. Let's take some time to actually look at the households and what do they need, what do they want, what do they aspire for, all those people in my chart. And let's stop doing everything that the businesses want. Let's look at the households. And I think that's a cornerstone of Zach's message. And yeah, so I'm going to leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed this. Fight it out in the comments below, and I'd love your feedback. I'll put links, I'll put my email, my Substack and stuff. I'll put those up at the end, and hopefully you guys will, if you like this type of delivery, you prefer it to reading the articles on my Substack, hopefully you'll come back for the next one, which will be on riding the tiger's back, which is all about the race to the bottom again. capitalist economic theory and how credit is basically destroying our economic flow. So yeah, take care, everybody, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and comment and all of those nice things. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.